The air backstage at Good Morning America was thick with quiet nerves. People moved quickly but carefully, whispering in corners, checking notes, glancing at their phones. Something felt off. Even the floor manager, usually calm, was unusually tense. They all knew today wasn't just any interview. Prince Harry was here. Harry stepped into the studio surrounded by his security. Not too tight, not too loose, just enough to show presence. His face looked calm, but his eyes scanned every corner of the set. He had done dozens of interviews before, but lately every conversation felt like a test, a trap wrapped in a smile. He was here to talk about his mental health foundation, his charity work, and his upcoming documentary series about trauma and healing. But Harry knew better. No conversation about him stayed soft for long. George Stephanopoulos greeted him with a handshake and a warm smile. They exchanged a few words off camera. It all felt normal, almost too normal. That's what worried Harry. The cameras rolled, the stage lights brightened. George opened with easy questions about Harry's foundation. They joked lightly about life in California, raising children, and public service. Harry spoke with ease, his voice steady, his message focused. He felt for a brief moment that this interview might actually stay on track. Then George's smile faded just a little, barely noticeable. His tone shifted. His next question came sharp, quiet, but cutting. "Prince Harry, many Americans respect your decision to step away from royal duties," George said. "But don't you think it's a bit ironic to leave the very institution that gave you your platform, only to constantly profit from criticizing it?" The words hung in the air like a gunshot. For half a second, the studio went still. Even the camera operator stopped breathing. Harry's face didn't flinch, but his jaw tightened. His hands, resting calmly just a moment ago, now clenched slightly. "It's not about profiting," Harry replied, voice firm but steady. "It's about telling the truth. It's about helping others through the things I've lived." George leaned in. "But isn't there a difference between telling the truth and exploiting personal grievances on camera?" This one hit deeper. Harry blinked slowly. He had rehearsed answers for most questions. "Not this one. I've been through hell," he said. "And I've chosen to use that pain to shed light on larger issues. That makes people uncomfortable? Maybe they should ask why." The audience, trained to stay silent, shifted in their seats. A few gasped quietly. A producer behind the glass pane looked down at his monitor. His hand hovered over a cue button. Behind Harry's calm front, something darker stirred. Not fear, but awareness. This wasn't a question. This was a setup. And George was reading from a script Harry had never seen. Flashbacks fired through Harry's mind, one of them just weeks ago, inside a secure room in California. A retired intelligence officer had warned him, "If you keep speaking like this, you'll become a threat. Not just to the monarchy, but to the system behind it." At the time, Harry had dismissed it, but now the warning rang loud in his head. George didn't stop. "You've often spoken about being silenced by the royal family," he said, his voice cold now, no longer friendly. "But what about the silence you've created for others? Those who can't respond publicly to the things you've said." "About them?" Harry paused. He looked straight into George's eyes. Not as a guest to a host, but as a man to another man playing a dangerous game. "I don't control who gets to speak," Harry said. "But I do know what it's like to be punished for telling the truth. And if that truth burns bridges, maybe those bridges were never safe to walk on." George looked down at his notes. He didn't smile. The interview wrapped quickly after that. The usual thank you lines were said, but no one meant them. The handshake at the end was cold. As Harry left the set, his phone was already vibrating. Social media was exploding. #HarryVsGeorge was trending within minutes. Clips from the interview were already on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. One moment replayed again and again. Harry's sharp response to being called a profiteer. The comment section was a war zone. Backstage, a young assistant handed George a small card. He read it and nodded. He didn't speak. Simply placed it face down on the table. If someone had turned it over, they would have seen a line printed in block letters. Phase 1, complete. Far from the cameras, in a private room at a London address that didn't appear on any map, an old man in a gray suit watched the interview live. He didn't blink. He turned to the younger man beside him. "Move the next piece," he said. The younger man nodded and sent a message on an encrypted phone. The message was short. He took the bait. Somewhere else, in a newsroom, in an embassy, in a royal chamber, people began to move. Because today wasn't just about a bad interview. It was a spark. One that would ignite something much bigger than Harry could imagine. And no one, not even him, was fully prepared for the fire that was coming. The leak the morning after the interview. Harry woke up to the sound of phones buzzing nonstop. The sun had barely risen in Montecito, but the storm had already arrived. Meghan stood by the window, her face pale. She didn't look at him right away. "You need to see this," she said, holding out her phone. It wasn't just trending. It was everywhere. Cable news, social media, global headlines. But this wasn't just about George's question or Harry's response. Something new had entered the conversation. A document. Leaked. Sensitive. Explosive. It was posted by an anonymous account with no followers and no bio. A scan of what looked like a classified British intelligence briefing, marked top secret. The document included portions of emails and internal communications. One section referenced Harry by name. Another hinted at Meghan having exchanged encrypted messages with someone connected to a Middle Eastern security agency. During the time, she was still adjusting to royal life. The file suggested there were concerns that Harry's mental health interviews were intentionally exposing operational vulnerabilities of past Crown missions, whatever that meant. It didn't make full sense, but it didn't have to. The implication was enough. News anchors pounced on the story. Was the prince a security risk? Was Meghan communicating with foreign officials without protocol? Did Prince Harry's media tour break national security boundaries? Is this payback for stepping away or something more? Back in London, Buckingham Palace issued a cold, cautious statement. The Crown has no comment on unverified intelligence leaks. Prince Harry no longer holds an official role within the institution. No denial, no support. Harry slammed his laptop shut. "This isn't just about the interview," he muttered. "Someone planned this." Meghan nodded. She had seen it coming, in quiet whispers and unspoken warnings. A secure call came in. Lena Cosme, a sharp, fearless investigative journalist, working with Al Jazeera, wanted to talk. She said she had information, something Harry needed to see. He agreed to meet her later that week in a private location in New York. But before that, more chaos hit. That evening, CNN aired a special investigation segment, The Royal Disconnect: Secrets from the Shadows. The segment heavily featured clips from George Stephanopoulos' interview with Harry, paired with chilling narration and dramatic music. As if it had all been produced in advance. They even had graphics prepared, timelines, connections, whistleblower quotes. The entire story had been reframed not as a brave interview, but as a crisis. Harry's team tried to contact ABC for a retraction. They got silence. George released a statement through his spokesperson. "I stand by the integrity of the questions asked. The viewers deserve truth, even when it's uncomfortable." It felt rehearsed, strategic. Later that night, Meghan found something buried in the document leak, a single phrase in the margins of one page. Phase 2, Media Consolidation. She showed it to Harry. "What does it mean?" she asked. Harry stared at it, his thoughts spiraling. He remembered a conversation from a year ago. He had been warned, not in so many words, that media control was the real throne. That modern wars weren't fought with guns, but with stories. Phase 2, he whispered, means this is just beginning. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Daniel Gray, A former BBC journalist turned whistleblower was piecing together his own puzzle. He had seen the leaked document and recognized the format MI6 briefings from 5 years ago. He used to read them weekly when he still had clearance. Only now, he realized something chilling. The language in the leaked document was intentionally designed to provoke suspicion, but nothing inside it could be fully verified. It was manufactured doubt. Daniel made a secure call to Lena. That leak wasn't just intelligence, he said. It was bait. For who? For the press? For the public? For the prince? Lena was already 3 steps ahead. She had been investigating a British defense contractor called Langdon Krieg, which had close ties to both the royal estate and international media groups. One of their board members had dinner with George Stephanopoulos 2 nights before the interview. She sent Daniel a copy of the guest list. If we can connect this, she said, it's not just about Harry anymore. It's about who controls the story and who writes the ending. As Harry sat alone in the garden later that night, staring at the stars, he thought about his mother. Diana had warned him once, long ago, that the real danger wasn't the spotlight. It was the people who decided where the light pointed and when. Lena Cosme stepped into the quiet cafe tucked between 2 old buildings in Lower Manhattan. She wore no makeup, her hair tied back in a simple bun, her coat slightly too big, the look of someone trying to disappear. She sat at a corner table where no camera could catch her face. She carried only one thing, a small leather notebook that never left her side. Across from her sat Daniel Gray, the former BBC investigative journalist who had vanished from public life. 3 years ago, after exposing a story the British government denied existed. He looked older, more tired, but sharper than ever. I confirmed it, Daniel said without greeting. That document they leaked after Harry's interview, it's not real. It's a Frankenstein file. Real structure, fake content. Meant to look legitimate, but engineered to suggest guilt. Lena opened her notebook. I've been tracking Langdon Krieg for over a year, she said. They've been funding media campaigns under shell companies in the UK, US, and UAE. One of those campaigns. Royal Clarity Initiative. Sounds harmless, right? It's a media pressure network. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Let me guess. George Stephanopoulos just happened to attend one of their dinners. Lena nodded. 2 nights before the interview, sitting next to Langdon Krieg's American director. No cameras, no official record, but I have photos. Daniel leaned forward, lowering his voice. Langdon Krieg isn't just media manipulation. They handle strategic communications for international arms deals. They're targeting Harry. It's not about scandal. It's about silence. They both knew what that meant. It wasn't about personal embarrassment. This was a controlled narrative, carefully orchestrated by those who felt threatened by Harry's growing voice. A voice that didn't play by their rules. That same night, Harry flew to New York under a low-profile security detail. The meeting had to be secret. Too many eyes were watching now, and not just tabloids or paparazzi. These were government eyes, private intelligence firms, media operatives with no names, just objectives. Harry met Lena and Daniel in a secure underground office below a nonprofit art center, a cover used by journalists for off-the-record conversations. He looked exhausted but alert. I always knew there'd be pushback, he said. But this is surgical. Lena handed him a printout. It was a corporate diagram, dozens of connected entities tracing Langdon Krieg's influence through shell charities, private equity firms, and a global PR alliance with reach into nearly every major media platform. Why me? Harry asked, his voice low. Because you're untethered, Daniel replied. You're not in power. But you're still a symbol. They can't control you, so now they're trying to erase you. First your credibility, then your message. Harry's jaw tightened. They made the mistake of making this public. I won't go silent. Lena hesitated, then said, there's something else. She opened her notebook again and pulled out a photograph. It was a scanned page, a letter. Handwritten. It's from Diana. to someone named Youssef el-Hakim, a former Saudi diplomat known for his quiet diplomacy and bacchanal negotiations during the Gulf conflicts. The letter was dated 1996, a year before her death, spoke about a coming storm, about the monarchy's willingness to sacrifice its own to preserve image, and warned of a strategy known as the mirror doctrine. The mirror doctrine? Harry asked. Lena nodded. It was an old MI6 strategy used in the Cold War. Leak just enough truth to make lies believable. Use real pain to hide real power. They mirrored stories, so even the victims questioned what was real. Daniel added, Project Mirror was revived after your marriage to Meghan. Internal documents called it a containment contingency. You were never supposed to become your own voice. Harry sat back, breathing slowly. The pieces were falling together, not just about the interview, not just about the media pressure, but about something much deeper, something systemic. His entire journey had been watched, shaped, countered, and now they were escalating. Daniel handed Harry a secure flash drive. It contains evidence of coordinated narrative suppression by 6 major outlets, including payments made through Langdon Krieg intermediaries. The moment you release anything, they'll come at you harder. But it will be truth. Documented, sourced. Lena added, I've also spoken to a senior editor at The Guardian. He's ready to go public if he has proof you're not just a disgruntled royal, but the target of an international manipulation campaign. Harry didn't respond immediately. He stared at the dim light on the ceiling, his fingers drumming lightly against the table. Then, without looking down, he said, I'll go public. But not through them. Daniel frowned. Then how? Harry stood. His voice was calm, certain. Through you. They stared at him. You still believe in real journalism, Harry continued. It's the kind that costs something. You've both risked your careers. So has Meghan. So did my mother. We don't fight this with PR. We fight this with truth. Outside, the snow had begun to fall over New York. Back at Good Morning America, George Stephanopoulos was in a closed-door meeting with network executives. He was handed a sealed envelope containing a legal warning. A preliminary injunction was being filed by an international media watchdog accusing ABC News of knowingly participating in disinformation distribution. He smiled. Let them try, he said quietly, but in a windowless room in Qatar. An Al Jazeera control producer loaded a new headline into their rundown for the following evening. Prince Harry, the interview that wasn't meant to happen. And beneath it, the subtitle, Tomorrow, 9 p.m., The Truth Behind the Silence. The countdown had begun. The past resurfaces. It was quiet inside the safe house, the kind of quiet that felt heavy rather than peaceful. Harry sat alone at the edge of a long wooden table in a room with no windows. The only light came from a single lamp overhead. On the table in front of him was a stack of black folders, raw, declassified, and incomplete pieces of stories that had been hidden for decades. Across from him sat Daniel Gray, who had flown in just hours earlier from London. His voice was lower than usual. We found something, Daniel said. You're not going to like it. Harry didn't flinch. He just nodded. Ready? Daniel opened the folder and pulled out a copy of a letter. Old, scanned, but clear. The handwriting was familiar. Smothers. It was dated 1996, sent from a safe house in Paris. Addressed not to the media, not to a friend, but to a name Harry hadn't heard since childhood. Youssef el-Hakim, a Saudi diplomat and quiet advisor to several Western intelligence liaisons in the 90s. Harry read slowly, each line pulling him deeper. I fear for the boys, not just their safety, but their minds. I'm being watched more than ever. They don't need to kill me if they can rewrite the truth. It's the mirror doctrine, they call it now. You know what it means? They'll let the truth leak just enough to bury it in noise. And if my sons grow to question the system, they'll be punished. Not for what they do, but for who they are. Harry's hands trembled slightly as he reached the end of the letter. I thought she was paranoid, he whispered. Back then, they said she was just emotional, overreacting. Daniel replied softly, She wasn't wrong. Meanwhile, in Paris, Lena Cosme had gone quiet. She was supposed to call in the previous night after returning from an interview with a retired MI6 officer, but her phone was off. Messages weren't going through. Daniel tried her emergency satellite line. Nothing. Then, at 3:17 a.m., a call came in. It was scrambled and short. They took her notes, the voice said. It was Lena, whispering. They were already waiting in the hotel room. One of them spoke English. One of them spoke English with a British accent. The line cut out. Daniel looked at Harry. They're cleaning house. They know we're close, Harry said. Back in London, a strange event occurred, barely covered by the press. A fire broke out in a private archive building. Known to house government records from the early 2000s, most of the damage was controlled, but one section was destroyed. Completely. Intelligence briefings marked non-operational royal exposure. Coincidence? Unlikely. Daniel received an encrypted drop later that day. Inside were surveillance photos, blurry but recognizable. Prince William in a private meeting with Tobias Langdon, the CEO of Langdon Krieg. They were seated together at a private estate known for quiet political negotiations. The timestamp was just 2 days before George Stephanopoulos' interview with Harry. The implication? The royal family wasn't just silent, they were possibly coordinating. Harry stared at the photo. His expression was unreadable. You think he's involved? Dongyu asked gently. Harry didn't answer right away. Then he said, if he believes he's protecting the institution, he'll do anything. Daniel nodded grimly. That's what they count on. Elsewhere, the American media machine was moving faster. George Stephanopoulos gave a second statement, more aggressive this time. He called Harry unwilling to accept public accountability and hinted at serious ethical questions surrounding his charity's finances. It was the start of Phase 3, character assassination. Meanwhile, Meghan had been warned by her security team to avoid all public appearances. She received a strange envelope at their home. No return address, just a USB drive inside. When played, it contained old video footage clearly edited of Meghan during her time in Canada, speaking to someone off-camera about cutting ties with the UK system. It was taken out of context, but dangerous. They're trying to isolate us. The confrontation, the lights in the makeshift broadcast room were dim, but the tension was bright and burning. A small LED panel flickered softly behind Prince Harry as he stared into the lens of an untraceable live-streaming camera rigged by Thorne, the Berlin-based digital freedom activist. No studio, no filters, no media handlers. It's just a raw feed. One man's voice streamed across thousands of underground channels. Harry's face was calm, but focused. In his hands were pages of documentation, files connecting defense money to media campaigns, scanned emails between Langdon Krieg operatives, and internal memos from Project Mir. Thorne gave the signal. The red light blinked once. You're live, he said. Harry leaned forward. My name is Prince Harry, he began. And for the last year, I've watched a story being told about me. Not the one I lived, the one they wrote. And today, I want to show you the difference. What followed was something no one expected. No rehearsed monologue. No emotional plea. Just facts connected piece by piece. Harry showed the leaked files, described the timeline, and exposed names. He pointed out the exact dinner George Stephanopoulos had attended just before their explosive interview. He read parts of his mother's hidden letter, highlighting how her fears in 1996 had become real in 2025. The mirror doctrine was designed to make truth indistinguishable from fiction. It was built to confuse the public until nothing could. Be trusted. That's how power stays safe, when the people no longer know who to believe. Within minutes, the stream had spread across Reddit, Telegram, independent press channels, and even certain hacked television screens across Europe. It couldn't be blocked. The fire had started. At the same time, across the Atlantic, George Stephanopoulos walked into a private studio to record an emergency segment for ABC. The network was in full damage control mode. Legal threats were piling up. The head of investigative standards at ABC had gone silent. Someone from inside had leaked production emails showing coordination between George's team and Langdon Krieg consultants. George's voice was calm, but colder than ever. If Prince Harry is implying that journalists are pawns of government contractors, then he's lost all grip on reality, he said into the camera. He's not exposing corruption, he's fueling conspiracy. But even as he spoke, the producers behind the glass were watching Harry's stream in real time. And they were pale. In Qatar, Lina Kazmi finally uploaded her full report. It was titled, "The Crown, the Cameras, and the Contractors Inside the Modern Royal Media Machine." It named names. It linked timelines. It included testimony from 2 former British intelligence officers who confirmed the existence of Project Mir and its role in shaping royal narratives during times of public unrest. The report aired live at 9 p.m. across Al Jazeera's platforms. And within 10 minutes, it was trending worldwide. At that same moment, Harry's interview feed changed. He was no longer alone. Beside him now sat Lina, tired, bruised from her encounter in Paris, but unbroken. "We were never supposed to meet," she said to the camera. But when a journalist and a survivor find themselves on the same side, you have to ask, who really controls the line between the public and the truth? She held up a copy of the leaked memo that mentioned Phase 4 reputation termination protocol, a quiet method of destroying public figures through false financial allegations, targeted rumors, and strategic isolation. George Stephanopoulos didn't just ask a difficult question, Lina said. He was executing the beginning of a pre-approved narrative arc. Harry added quietly, "That arc ends with people like me erased." In London, the Crown Communications Office released a short statement. The royal household maintains no involvement in media partnerships outside of official engagements. Allegations made in recent reports are unfounded. It was sterile, too sterile, but it didn't matter, because by now journalists everywhere were digging into Langdon Krieg's contracts. Parliament opposition leaders demanded an emergency debate. U.S. congressional aides called for an inquiry into foreign influence in American broadcast media. The BBC ran a rare primetime special asking, "Has the press been compromised?" George Stephanopoulos was summoned for a live confrontation. He accepted. The next evening, in a neutral studio hosted by an international media rights coalition, he sat across from Lina and Daniel Gray. No pre-written questions, no edits. The world watched. Lina began, "Did you meet with Langdon Krieg executives before your interview with Prince Harry?" George didn't blink. "I meet with many people. That's the nature of media." Daniel pressed harder. "Were you aware that your questions aligned with talking points circulated by Langdon Krieg 4 days prior?" George smiled slightly. "You're assuming influence where there was none." Lina leaned forward. "Did you see the memo marked Mirror Protocol activation before the interview?" George paused just for a fraction of a second. And in that pause, everything changed. The world saw it. The silence, the calculation, and the guilt. Viewers across countries from Argentina to South Africa, from Canada to Pakistan, watched the moment when a once-respected journalist refused to deny what was obvious. It wasn't a confession, but it was enough. That night, Harry's underground stream hit over 100 million views. Hashtag Project Mirror trended for 3 straight days. Independent journalists began releasing their own investigations, showing how widespread the manipulation had become. And still, through all the chaos, no word came from Prince William. No statement from King Charles. No denial, just silence. But silence, in this case, was no longer protection. It was confirmation, because the confrontation had happened. And the truth was no longer theirs to contain. The unraveling rain hit the London pavement in steady sheets as King Charles III stared out the palace window, his reflection fractured by the glass and the storm. The morning brief was spread across a polished mahogany desk behind him, but he hadn't turned to read it. He didn't need to. The headlines were already etched in his mind. Prince Harry exposes global media conspiracy, royal family implicated in psychological ops. BBC, ABC, and Al Jazeera link London Krieg to Project Mirror. George Stephanopoulos grilled on air, silent. When it mattered most, outside Buckingham Palace, barricades had gone up. Protesters chanted. Some held signs in support of Harry, others demanded investigations, truth commissions, resignations. A few just screamed for answers, for justice, for someone to finally break the cycle of manufactured silence. In Washington, the U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee convened a special closed-door session. Former employees of Langdon Krieg were called in, one of them a 42-year-old systems analyst named Jenna Ortega. No relation to the actress, had brought emails showing coordination between the firm, private British contractors, and several European media regulators. Her testimony described Project Mirror in cold military language, a non-lethal narrative destabilization tool aimed at influential public figures deemed disruptive to institutional harmony. The room went silent when she added, Prince Harry was Phase 3. Lena Cosme was not even listed. She was a variable. Back in London, Lena sat in a small, windowless hotel room in Notting Hill with Harry and Thorne. The three hadn't slept much. Since the broadcast, everything had changed, but not in the way they'd hoped. The media was divided. Some networks called Harry a hero. Others framed him as delusional, damaged, or dangerous. The truth, once exposed, wasn't universally accepted. It's worse than before, Thorne said, tapping his laptop. Cracked the mirror, but now everyone's seeing their own version and the pieces. Harry looked up from the printed letter in his lap, the one Diana had written 2 years before her death. Her voice echoed in his memory. If they can't control the crown, they'll control the story. And if you ever feel like the truth is too dangerous to speak, that's exactly when you must. He whispered, We're not done. Lena nodded. Not yet. They needed a final move. Not another stream, not another report, something undeniable. Thorne had an idea. There's one last thing, he said. The live satellite backup feed from your Stephanopoulos interview. ABC never aired the full footage, just what passed through the editorial cut. But there's a raw file. And it's not stored in New York. It's in Zurich, encrypted. Harry raised an eyebrow. Can we get it? Thorne smiled for the first time in days. We don't need to. I already did. The footage was brutal. George's full question sequence, uncut, showed clearly coordinated language that matched Langdon Krieg's leaked talking points, word for word. Worse, just before the cameras started rolling, George was seen glancing at a prep sheet with the Langdon Krieg logo in the corner. He'd folded it quickly, but not fast enough. That was the final crack. Harry uploaded the raw footage through dozens of mirrored channels, but he timed it with something more impactful, a live panel discussion with former BBC editor Elaine Ward, American intelligence whistleblower Sarah Liu, and investigative host Mehdi Hazan. They dissected the footage in real time, froze frames, compared language, lined it all up against leaked documents. By the time the stream ended, a global audience of over 200 million had watched it. Public trust in major broadcast networks plummeted within 48 hours. ABC suspended George indefinitely. Langdon Krieg's London office was raided by Swiss and German regulators. Hard drives were seized. Names were exposed. The silence after the storm. It was just after 3 a.m. when Lena's burner phone lit up. Unknown caller. She answered without hesitation. The voice on the other end was male, low, and steady. You've gone far enough? Walk away. No threats. No yelling. Just clinical intent and the dead calm of someone used to not being questioned. She didn't respond. Just hung up, tossed the phone into the hotel sink, and turned on the tap. Across the room, Prince Harry stood in the dark, watching the street below from the fourth-floor window. The city looked different now, like something sacred had cracked. The towers still stood, the trains still ran, but the quiet between things had shifted. It was the sound of consequence. The fallout from the Zurich footage was still reverberating. ABC's legal team had gone silent. George Stephanopoulos hadn't been seen in public for days. Several major news anchors across Europe had taken leave. Langdon Krieg's London and Geneva operations were officially shuttered, but people like Thorne knew better. That kind of machinery doesn't just shut down. It vanishes, reforms, reemerges. That morning, The Guardian ran a front page. Headline, The Crown and the Mirror. What happens when the prince fights back? But the article ended with a question Harry couldn't ignore. And when the cameras turn off? What happens to those who disrupt the balance of power? Lena returned from the bathroom, still drying her hands. They're rattled. That means they're desperate. Harry nodded, but said nothing. They'd push the machine, not just the monarchy, not just the media, but the entire invisible web of political alliances, corporate handlers, narrative shapers, the real machinery behind perception. And now the machine was turning back toward them. 3 days later, an encrypted flash drive arrived anonymously at Thorne's tech safe house. Inside it, a data log from Langdon Krieg's classified archive labeled Mirror Phase 4. The files included surveillance, blueprints, psychological dossiers, and a name that sent cold through everyone in the room. Operation Snowgate. According to the documents, it was the next phase in the company's playbook, designed not to suppress individuals but to dismantle credibility structures. The free press, whistleblower networks, independent tribunals. Snowgate wasn't about silencing one man. It was about making truth seem impossible to recognize. Thorne scrolled through the final lines of code and exhaled. This isn't over. It's evolving. Harry looked at Lena. Do we take this public? She didn't answer at first. Then she said, if we do, they'll say we're conspiracy theorists. We'll lose control of the story again. If we don't, then they rewrite history while we're still breathing, Harry finished. They made a choice. That night, Harry went live on an independent feed. No networks, no filters, just him. A single shot. The file in hand. You've been lied to. Not just about me, not just about my family, but about how the story gets made and who decides what you believe. This isn't about revenge. It's about transparency. If truth is dangerous, it's only because it changes things. Then he uploaded every document. It took less than an hour for intelligence agencies to respond. Servers across 3 continents were locked. Files were scrubbed. DNS trails erased. But it was too late. Journalists across Nairobi, Berlin, Melbourne, and New York began publishing synchronized breakdowns of Snowgate. They connected the dots, laid bare the machine behind media manipulation, electoral influence, even civil uprisings seeded by artificial outrage. 3 weeks later, Harry was summoned to appear before a special session of the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva. Not as a royal, not even as a whistleblower, but as a witness to a global information war. His testimony was calm, measured, clear. He spoke not just of his personal targeting, but of the systems that fed off division and the power of narrative as a weapon. By the time he left the chamber, 6 nations had introduced joint resolutions calling for a global charter on information integrity. The vote passed 124-8. He walked out of the UN building alone. Reporters swarmed. Cameras clicked. 1,000 headlines were being written at once. But this time, he wasn't part of someone else's narrative. This time, the story was his. In the weeks that followed, the noise faded. Langdon Krieg went bankrupt officially. Its assets sold to shell companies. The faces changed, but the structures remained, lurking behind lobbying firms and tech labs. Lena returned to Istanbul. Thorne vanished into Berlin's hacker underground. And Harry? He stayed quiet until one day a young journalist named Aisha Noor from an independent Sudanese press collective received a letter. It wasn't signed, but inside was a single line. The truth is never safe, but silence never saves. Attached was a hard drive. Inside, everything the world had missed. Project Echo. Mirror Phase 5. Files on every major state's cooperation. Aisha didn't hesitate. She published it all. And as another storm rose around the world, one thing was clear. The mirror hadn't shattered, it had multiplied.